Say hello, I'm Vince Staley, Executive Director of Media Impact Funders. I'm going to introduce our next panel. Thanks, Rosie. So, Media Impact Funders is a knowledge network of grant makers who support media in the public interest. And we have had the good fortune of being here over the last 2 days with our annual national gathering of journalism funders, really from all over the country. And it has been a very rich couple of days. It's been a remarkable time to be showcasing what's happening in Pittsburgh, in some ways for good and for ill at the same time, but a remarkable moment, and we've been able to share with our colleagues from around the country some really rich work that is being done by folks like Mila and her team at Public Source, and the beautiful work being done across the river at City of Asylum. And so it's been really great to share that experience with our colleagues. And thanks to Max and Jeannie from Pittsburgh Foundation and Grant Oliphant and his team at the Heinz Endowment for joining us in hosting our gathering and inviting us to contribute to this gathering as well. So I'm going to introduce John Sotsky, who is the Director of Assessment and Strategy at the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. He's also a board member of Media Impact Funders, and he's the guy who helps us understand our own numbers and to understand data more richly. And that's going to be what he's doing here for us in today's session as well. He's going to reveal data and information that the Knight Foundation has commissioned from the Gallup organization on attitudes about the First Amendment, student attitudes. So it's important, all of us have feelings about it, but the Knight Foundation has the data. And so John is going to share with us how students, college students and high school students feel about the First Amendment. They've been studying this for going back all the way to 2004 in some of the reports from Gallup. And so that would be enough, but actually we have some actual flesh and blood college students along with John to share their personal impressions as well. And so Mark Marino and Christiana Dillard are going to join us as well. You all coming on now? I guess I'll just say that in keeping with these highly polarized times, Mark is a recent graduate of Penn State, and Christiana is a senior at Pitt. So I don't know if we're going to keep them apart or how we're going to manage the division in our times, but they're going to share with us their attitudes and experience as well.
Thank you, Vince. Who is ready to hear about some research? It wasn't quite April Ryan's reception, but I'll take it. That was pretty good. So I'm John Sotsky at Knight Foundation. Knight Foundation is focused on supporting informed and engaged communities, and one of the ways we do that is by being proud champions of First Amendment rights and freedom of expression. And that includes both addressing longstanding challenges to freedom of expression as well as confronting new challenges presented in the digital age. We do that through grant making, and we also do that through research. As Vince alluded to, one of the pieces of research that we've done for a long time has been surveying high school students about their First Amendment attitudes and behaviors. And that dates back to 2004. But it's only been more recently that we've started to look at the attitudes of college students. That was partly triggered by events on the University of Missouri's campus in 2015, where students who were protesting denied the rights of a reporter to come on and cover those protests. It got us thinking, we should really start exploring the attitudes of college students, A, because they're future generations that will be shaping First Amendment norms in this country, but B, because there's so many issues that are occurring on college campuses. And since that time, and we did an original survey in 2016, we've gone on to do another survey at the end of last year, which we released in March, which I'm going to tell you more about in a moment. But you can imagine all the events that have occurred during that time, from Milo's tour of the country to demonstrations at Berkeley, through events in college towns like Charlottesville, and the unfortunate events last year. So I'll spend a few minutes telling you a bit more about this research project, and then very quickly get into an opportunity to hear it directly from the mouths of college students themselves. So the study that we did, and it's a partnership with Gallup, and in this year's version, it was done in collaboration with the Charles Koch Foundation, with Stanton Foundation, and with American Council for Education. So diverse group of partners, to say the least. We surveyed over 3,000 college students, including an oversample of historically black colleges and universities, and with 39 colleges, both public and private universities, all types of sizes and all over the country. And we did it in the fall of last year. Released the full report. I'm just going to cover a few slides with top-line findings to ground their conversation today. But you can find the full report and the full data set for anyone who's interested in doing additional research on it. But just to cover some of the highlights and top-line findings, one thing we ask about is the security of First Amendment rights. And what we found from the previous version to this year is across the board a declining perception among students that each of the First Amendment rights is secure. So most notably are the drops in freedom of the press, but also sizable drops in freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and to petition the government. We've found in both surveys that we've done that men are generally feel more confident or feel like First Amendment rights are more secure than women do. We find that white students feel more secure in rights than black students do. But what we found this year, in terms of what's driving that change, was really how political affiliation was so much of the factor. We are looking here on the right at how students that identify as Democrats, Independents, and Republicans responded to this question in 2016 and 2017. And you can see that actually Republican students, they in some cases actually feel that these rights are more secure than they were in 2016. But Democratic students, the drops are pretty sizable, especially in freedom of the press. What's interesting at the same time is there's another question about trust in press, and we see actually that number rose quite a bit, also driven by Democratic students. In addition to that broad question about First Amendment right security, we then dive into issues on campus. And what we found is we use a question, and it's a select one or the other. Would you prefer a campus where all types of speech is allowed, even speech that is offensive, or an environment that prohibits some speech but tries to promote a more inclusive, positive learning environment? And while majorities of students still say that they prefer all types of speech to be allowed on campus, we see that the number is declining, and actually a growing number of students, now close to 30%, say they prefer an environment that really focuses on positivity and sometimes limits free speech. I think how you balance both like absolute freedom of expression with trying to promote inclusivity and a positive experience is one of the existential struggles that we identified through the survey work that students are grappling with. We also asked them if they felt like they could express themselves on campus, and it's gone from 54% to over 6 in 10 students who now feel that they are concerned about saying things because they don't want to offend others on campus. So the environment is limiting how they exercise their freedom of speech. That is not true across all groups. We actually found pretty interesting finding was that political conservatives were identified not just by themselves but by all students as the group that probably would feel least comfortable with expressing their views on campus just based on their opinions of the environment. So we then asked them about policies, and one across the board finding was students generally don't know, I didn't know when I was a student, about what our campus policies were about freedom of speech. So there's a lack of awareness on things like, are there safe spaces on campus or designated free speech zones? And then the remaining students who did know, it's a fairly even split for speech codes and free speech zones, whether their campuses have instituted such things. An overwhelming majority of campuses have included safe spaces. Students tend to support these types of interventions that schools are making, except for the speech codes where they're pretty evenly divided. So interesting is how students perceive the actions of colleges related to controversial speakers on campus, which has certainly been a big issue over the last 2 years. And it depends on how you ask the question. So if you say, Should colleges disinvite speakers because some students are opposed to those speakers and their views? Only about a quarter of students say, yeah, colleges should disinvite those speakers. But if you frame it in terms of, well, there could be concerns about violence, then it moves to, it almost flips. It becomes 7 in 10 students then support disinviting speakers. In terms of student actions and whether they think protesting is acceptable, they generally find general protests acceptable, shouting down speakers to be less acceptable, and about 10% who say violence is always or sometimes acceptable, which is like less than the others, but 10% of people still thinking that violence is okay is still, I think, alarming in some senses. And the final area we talked about was this dynamic between where is speech actually occurring on campus. And we thought this was pretty interesting. Found that more students reported that most political and social discourse that they're having is on social media and online versus in the buildings and in the quads of campus. So discourse has shifted online, and then we started to ask them about the nature of that discourse. And when I asked them to agree about social media stifles freedom of expression because too many people block those who they don't agree with, or that they're afraid to express themselves because for fear of retaliation or being shamed, we actually find majorities actually agree with those statements and about the negative impacts of social media. Also see the internet broadly responsible for a rise in hate speech. And the final thing, and I've done some other survey work on the general population on this, not just college students, is this growing feeling like platforms and social media companies should be responsible for governing hate speech on their platforms. That's a very quick overview. I'm a New Yorker, so I go fast too, but that's 50 pages of research in like 5 slides. The link up there has more information, but I mean, really the meat of this conversation, what I'm excited about is to talk to students about how they experience these issues on campus. So we have Mark and Christy here, and we can clap. After spending a full year sitting in lecture halls and having older folks tell them and their peers about their views, the tables have turned now that we've gotten to June. And they're going to share with you what they think about some of these issues and how they experience them. So I'd start with this thing that came out in the survey, which is this dynamic about how do you balance freedom of expression with trying to promote inclusivity and a positive environment. Where do you think the line should be drawn on that? How's your experience been with how you promote free speech as well as try to protect sensitivities and not wanting to offend others? And maybe Mark, we'll start with you.
Well, I would say a bit of my background. I worked for my student newspaper, the Daily Collegian, for most of the time that I was in college. And our job was really to, just like April Ryan in the White House, to question authority of our university. So we couldn't really rely on just the university to tell us what's going on. So in turn, we had to be forceful of, ask questions that needed to be answered and, get a diverse group of sources as well. When you're writing a story, it's really hard to get all of those sources in there. So that's something that has to be built on with credibility over a long amount of time, I think.
And Mark, do you feel that, and Mark was at Penn State, how effectively do you think that the university did at trying to allow students to express themselves, but also trying to create an environment that wouldn't alienate other students?
I think specifically at my school, they have been trying over many years, most recently, to promote a lot of safe spaces for students and to promote the idea of peaceful protest, and they've done that through things like when something happens or when students do something good, the university sort of recognizes that. And I think in that way, that's one way that they can start to build on being a good, inclusive university. But again, I think it's something that, everyone is really just trying to do now, and they're learning as they go. They're making they're making good actions and bad mistakes sometimes, but either way, they should be credited for that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think administrators are really struggling here with how they govern these policies on campus. And Chrissy, in your experience at University of Pittsburgh, how well do you think the administrators have done to date at striking that balance?
So recently, I feel like there's been more of a push for, I think the year I came in, no, it was my sophomore year. I'm a rising senior at Pitt. It was the year of diversity, right? So there were a lot of safe spaces created by the university for students to express themselves, and just a lot of different places where students were vocalizing that there needed to be, places for them to be able to speak about their experiences without being judged and things like that. So that's good on the university's part. I think just based on my own personal experience, a lot of the student population is kind of isolated into their own groups, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I haven't self-imposed myself. My experience at Pitt has been a very, I call it my Black Pitt experience. I'm the president of an African American sorority. I'm in Black Action Society. I write for the magazine. And so it's kind of hard to get out of that bubble once you kind of start, like, as soon as my freshman year started, I kind of joined these organizations. But I think the university is trying to get so that the student population mixes a little bit more, but it needs work. Definitely needs work.
Mm-hmm. And Chrissy, I think you even started alluding to controversial speakers
Yes.
that came to campus. I'd be curious, how did that play out at University of Pittsburgh? And then, Mark, if you have any experience while you were at Penn State of controversial speakers come, I'd love to hear about.
So my freshman year, I think it was maybe March of 2016, Milo came to our campus. I didn't know anything about him, so I didn't go see him. But there was a lot of backlash. A lot of people felt attacked just by his presence. But a lot of the same people went to see him, were very disappointed. There were a lot of students there who were saying things or supporting things that he said that were pretty offensive. And so the school in bringing him there, their philosophy was just that we have really no stakes in this. We just want to bring a speaker here, and we're pretty neutral on this. The students were pretty polarized. It was like either you loved it or you hated it. But I think the school, after seeing the response, because it was overwhelmingly negative, I think that's kind of what got their gears going a little bit about trying to make safe spaces and things like that.
And also at Penn State, last year there was a speaker who was supposed to come to our school. His name was Richard Spencer, and he's you're saying, oh. He was a white supremacist who was supposedly responsible for coining the term alt-right. And what happened was the university, denied his PR team's request to visit our school and speak. And what happened after that was they filed a lawsuit against Penn State, saying that their First Amendment rights were denied or something. And the thing was, the lawsuit eventually flopped because Spencer's team didn't really follow through with the lawsuit. So it would have been interesting to see, where that sort of situation goes. And I don't think racism belongs anywhere, but I'm questionable of whether we should be blanketing things that we don't like to hear, because ultimately I feel like it jades the mirror of our own reality.
If you were running Penn State and Pitt, would you have allowed each of those respective speakers to come?
I want to say objectively yes, but again, identifying myself as a Black woman student, it would be hard for me to say yes, just because I know a lot of the things, I can't speak for Richard Spencer, but that Milo was saying directly kind of attacked my identity and the identity of others that are, in these intersections. So it would be hard, but I also very much appreciate overt opinions. I don't like people covering things up. I just want you to say it. And even if we don't come to any kind of agreement, at least it's out there, and at least I know who you are, and at least I can avoid you or whatever needs to be done. So I think at least bringing him there was good to see how it went. I'm not sure if bringing him back would be the best thing, but I don't know.
How about you, Mark?
I guess if Richard Spencer came to my school, or if he wanted to, I would give him a call and talk with him about what he was going to talk about, and then see from there what our course of action would be. However, I don't really think that... I think the university was they had good intentions of what they were doing. It's just the implications of it, if done enough times from both sides of any particular issue, can have consequences.
That's right. In general, Chris, you started alluding to change that was provoked by Milo coming to campus. I mean, if you think about it, just campus policies or the way that administrators on your respective campuses at schools were trying to balance free speech, freedom of expression, also create an environment that makes students eager to actually engage and learn. Do you have a wish list? Do you have anything that you wish the administrators could do or would focus on more that you feel like you or your peers, your sorority, your work as a journalist on campus would have benefited from?
I think in terms of me and my experience working with a student newspaper, I think there was a lot of responsibility on both sides of us as student reporters and the university themselves to sort of work together. I know that my professors themselves have said to me multiple times, we are here to help you. We're here to help you and your student newspaper grow, and we want to do that. But at the same time, a lot of students are just skeptical or sort of, too independent or too busy to really reach out and make long-standing relationships with people that can help you. So I think that there's a lot of work on both sides that need done, not just of the university themselves, but of the students to say, we need this, or we think this is important. Can we work together on this?
Great.
I think with Pitt, like I mentioned earlier, there's these kind of isolated groups, and everyone kind of can keep the same opinion without seeing any different ones because there's isolated groups. I think it's up to both the students and the administration to kind of bridge those many gaps. I've tried to take personal responsibility this year myself and try to branch out and do different things. But I also think the school could do a better job at publicizing different things that are going on because my sorority is part of Whole Greek Council. You've heard of IFC and Panhell. You don't hear about NPHC that much, and a lot of them have never heard of NPHC. So that's just one personal example. We don't know about each other. So I think the school and the students, if we could somehow just get a dialogue going about the different things that are even just going on campus, that would be a good place to start.
Well, maybe shifting gears a bit from on campus to conversation that's happening online. So there was that question about where is more dialogue occurring, where you personally engage in more social and political dialogue on campus or online. How would you each have answered that question? Granted, the answer is both, but pick if you have to say where more is happening for you personally. Which one is it? And could you just explain a little bit about why?
On campus for me, and even though it's not across groups, there are different ideas that are being, I'm learning different things, even from the people within my group. Even if it's just us complaining to each other, like, oh, girl, you see this, you see that? I'm learning, and I'm learning different things, even if it's like deeper into my own beliefs. So we're having those political conversations face to face. Because for me, I just feel like putting things on social media, I'm still a college student. I don't have a career secured. If I put anything crazy online, I just feel like that's not, and it might not even reflect how I feel a week from now. So I just feel like there's a permanence there that I'm not ready for that commitment, so I don't put it online.
That caution exists for people who are employed as well, let me tell you.
Yeah.
I would agree with Christy to say that a lot of my most meaningful like political and social interactions happen face-to-face with people, whether it's meeting someone, just becoming friends with someone else that you wouldn't normally become friends with, or listening to someone who you wouldn't normally listen to. That helps a lot to sort of formulate who you are and who you want to be, whereas on social media it just seems to be the same thing all the time, so it really doesn't have a lot of impact on how I think about things and how I feel, because if I feel some way, I'm not going to say it on social media, I'm going to say it to someone, and from that point on, you begin to develop a relationship and an understanding.
Yeah, and it comes down in the study where you have now 6 in 10 students who are saying that social media is actually stifling free expression because people are just blocking those who they disagree with and just cocooning themselves with others who are like-minded. And really jump in the survey results this year. Last year, less than half of students responded negatively about the effects of social media on free expression. This year, it's now 6 in 10. I wonder if that reflects your views. Do you think that social media has had a net positive or negative effect on freedom of expression?
I think since social media is still relatively new in the grand scheme of our world, we still don't really know how it's affecting our freedom. That could be just my opinion, but I think that social media only has so much of a leverage on us, and if we just continue to see it as what it is, and if things are limited, then, like I said before, it's only presenting a certain part of our world. So if some comments are not seen and some are, which is basically kind of how things already are, then we're not seeing the whole world. We're just seeing parts of it, really.
Yeah, and I feel like social media, I think there hasn't been like an increase or anything in any kind of like what we consider like hate speech or like negative freedom of expression. I feel like that's always been there. So it's just kind of like, I think you said earlier, Mark, like just reflecting things that are already there. So, I mean, yeah, that's social media is just kind of a reflection of. It's just what's the word?
It's weird.
Yeah, it's weird, and it's like emphasized more. It's just a little bit more extra because behind a screen, you could do a lot more than if you're not as bold as, or you're more bold than you would be in person, I think.
I mean, it's like we don't really face actual, like, criminal or repercussions for what we post on Facebook, but it really just comes down to being a good person and how do you want to present yourself.
June 21st, 2018, how do you feel about security of your First Amendment rights? You feel that they're very secure, threatened, very threatened? You're my first two responses on the 2018 survey.
Threatened, very threatened. Yeah, very threatened. And I feel like not just on campus, but just in life, since the election of our current president, I felt it more. Again, I feel like all this stuff has already been here, but now everything's heightened. But now it's like actual policies. I'm actually seeing policies being pitched or like played out that are actually threatening what I consider to be First Amendment rights. And this emphasis on fake news and things like that, that disturbs me. I just don't think, if your administration is generating fake news and you call somebody else having fake news, like it just doesn't make sense. It's like a simulation. I don't understand what's going on. So, yeah, definitely threatening. Very threatening.
So I think that nowadays democracy has always been threatened in some way, but to me, I feel like there are always people that are going to be fighting for it, such as journalists like Tony Norman, April Ryan, Mila Sanina, among so many others, and it all comes down to the people, news organizations, and being a good person that will really protect those rights, because if they're not upheld or if they're not questioned, then then we could lose them a lot or a little. So it really comes down to protecting what we have, I think.
That's right. We have time probably for 2 questions, if anyone has any. Going once, going twice. I think we have mics here, but I'm happy to repeat the question if you don't want to get up.
I'll speak really loud because I'm a teacher.
Okay.
And I work with a lot of teachers. I'm curious how you guys feel about the way that student voice and self-perception is being represented in the press. Do you think that the way that the press represents you as civically minded humans is fair, is accurate, and what your feelings are about that?
So just in case anyone didn't hear, the question was about how the press represents student attitudes, perhaps towards the First Amendment expression and the debates that are unfolding on college campuses.
Okay, I was like, okay. You hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. I'm not even sure I have an answer after all that.
So as far as students being the center of attention for different media, I think it's definitely out there, and I think a lot of it is up to the students reaching out and doing things that sort of deserve attention, not just sort of being asked to say something because they're a student. It takes a lot of perseverance to get your ideas out there. So I think as long as students are doing things that are important, then news media and any media will still include them.
Great. Any final thoughts?
Just very quickly, I actually appreciate a lot of the support that I guess older adults have given students. I'm not sure if it's necessarily reflected in the media, but I felt it, at least at my institution. So I think there's a lot of respect for young people and what we're doing because we're innovative and we're doing new things. So I appreciate that. But it would be cool to get it highlighted a little bit more. Yeah.
And we appreciate you both. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts.